It was Monday, the 16th of March, 1914, in the 3rd arrondissement of Paris. The afternoon light fell weak and grey across the Rue Drouot, where clerks hurried past shop windows, and the smell of coal smoke hung low over the tramway lines. At number 263, the officers of Le Figaro occupied the upper floors of a stone building near the Opéra. The newspaper had been published daily since 1826, and under the editorship of Gaston Calmette, it had become the voice of respectable opinion in France. Calmette was 55 years old, unmarried, a man of regular habits. He arrived at his desk each morning at 10 and received visitors by appointment. On this particular Monday, he had been told to expect a woman caller. Her name was given as Madame Henriette Caillot. She was the wife of Joseph Caillot, a former prime minister who had resigned his office 2 years earlier under circumstances of considerable public disgrace. The Figaro had been conducting a campaign against Monsieur Caillot for some months. Private letters had been printed. Intimate correspondence had been exposed to public scrutiny. Madame Caillot arrived at 5:30 in the afternoon. What followed would consume the attention of France, even as the continent moved toward war. Henriette Caillot was born Henriette Renoir on the 5th of December 1874 in the western suburbs of Paris. Her family were comfortable, though not wealthy. At the age of 19, she married Léo Claretie, a writer of modest reputation, 12 years her senior. 2 children were born. The marriage was conventional in all respects until the year 1907, when Madame Claretie began a liaison with Joseph Caillot. Caillot was at that time a minister in the French government. He was married. She was married. Neither made any particular effort toward discretion. By 1908, the affair was known to Paris society and reported in the newspapers. Divorces were obtained. The proprieties were observed only in their abandonment. Henriette and Joseph were married in 1909. Joseph Caillot had been educated at the École Libre des Sciences Politiques. He had served in various ministerial posts since 1899. In June of 1911, he became Prime Minister. His government lasted only 6 months. He had negotiated a settlement with Germany over colonial interests in Morocco, ceding territory in the Congo in exchange for French control of the North African Protectorate. The French press denounced the agreement as cowardly. Caillot was accused of betraying national interests. He resigned in January of 1912. The attacks upon his character did not cease with his resignation. Gaston Calmette, editor of Le Figaro, began a systematic campaign of public humiliation. In December of 1913, Calmette announced he possessed certain letters that would prove Caillot had obstructed justice during his tenure as Minister of Finance. He also claimed to have correspondence of an intimate nature exchanged between Caillot and his future second wife, while both were still married to others. The threat hung over the household for 3 months. Then, on Friday the 13th of March 1914, Le Figaro printed a letter. It had been written by Caillot to his mistress 13 years earlier, before their marriage. The tone was affectionate. The content suggested political dealings of a questionable nature. The publication was deliberate and public. It could not be withdrawn or forgotten. Over the weekend, the letter was discussed in drawing rooms and cafes throughout Paris. The newspapers reprinted it with commentary. Henriette Caillot understood that more letters would follow. Calmette had stated his intention clearly. The correspondence between herself and her husband, written during their affair, would be published next. The letters were private. They were passionate. They would be humiliating. On Monday morning, Henriette rose early. She breakfasted alone. Her husband had left the house before dawn. She dressed carefully in a dark walking suit and fur coat. At 11 o'clock, she sent her maid to fetch a taxi. She instructed the driver to take her to the gunsmith on the Rue de la Paix. The shop was called Gastin Renette. It had been established in 1792 and specialized in firearms of quality manufacture. Madame Caillou told the shopkeeper she required a pistol for personal protection. She was shown several models. She selected a Browning automatic, a weapon of Belgian manufacture. The shopkeeper inquired whether Madame had experience with firearms. She said she did not. He demonstrated the mechanism. The magazine held 6 rounds. The safety catch was explained. She paid in cash and left the shop with the pistol wrapped in paper. She returned home briefly. She did not go upstairs. She went to the study and sat at her husband's desk. She remained there for some time. Then she summoned her chauffeur and instructed him to bring the motor car to the front of the house. The afternoon was cold. Rain threatened, but had not yet begun. The motor car moved slowly through the traffic on the Champs-Élysées and crossed the river by the Pont de la Concorde. At 5:30, they arrived at number 263, Rue Drouot. Madame Caillou told the chauffeur to wait. She stepped from the car and walked to the entrance of Le Figaro. She climbed the stairs to the editorial offices on the 2nd floor. She gave her name to the clerk. She said she wished to see Monsieur Calmette. The clerk hesitated. Madame Caillou was not expected. But she was the wife of a former prime minister. The clerk went to inform his employer. After a moment, he returned and showed her into Calmette's private office. Calmette rose from his chair as she entered. He did not move from behind his desk. They spoke briefly. Witnesses in the adjoining office later stated they could not hear the words exchanged. The conversation lasted perhaps 30 seconds. Then Madame Caillou opened her handbag and withdrew the automatic pistol. She raised the weapon and fired. The first shot went wide and struck the wall. Calmette moved toward the door. She fired again. The second bullet struck him in the abdomen. He turned. She fired 4 more times in rapid succession. 2 more bullets found their target. Calmette fell to the floor. The editors burst into the room. They found Madame Caillou standing motionless, the pistol still in her hand. Smoke hung in the air. Calmette lay on the carpet, conscious but unable to speak. Blood pooled beneath him. One of the editors seized the pistol. Another knelt beside Calmette and loosened his collar. A doctor was summoned from a surgery 2 streets distant. He arrived within 10 minutes and examined the wounds. Calmette had been struck 4 times. 2 bullets had passed through soft tissue in the abdomen. A third had lodged near the spine. The 4th had grazed his shoulder. The doctor ordered him taken to a private hospital. A telephone message was sent ahead to prepare the operating theatre. The police were notified. An inspector arrived shortly before 6 o'clock. He found Madame Caillou seated in the office, attended by 2 clerks. She had made no attempt to leave the building. When asked why she had shot Monsieur Calmette, she replied that he had threatened to publish her private correspondence. The inspector cautioned her that anything she said would be recorded. She repeated the statement. She was taken into custody and transported to the prefecture of police. She insisted she would not travel in a police van. She demanded the use of her own motor car, which remained parked outside with the chauffeur waiting. The police acceded to this unusual request. She was driven to the prefecture in the rear seat of her own vehicle accompanied by 2 officers. At 7 o'clock that evening, formal charges were read to her. At 11 o'clock, word came from the hospital that Gaston Calmette had died of his injuries. The post-mortem examination was conducted on the following morning by Dr. Louis Toinot, professor of legal medicine at the Faculty of Paris. He determined that death had resulted from perforation of the intestine and subsequent peritonitis. 2 bullets had been recovered from the body. They were of 7.65 mm caliber, consistent with the Browning automatic seized at the scene. The weapon itself was examined by a firearms expert attached to the prefecture. He confirmed that all 6 cartridges in the magazine had been discharged. 4 bullets had struck the victim. 1 had embedded itself in the wall of the office. The 6th had not been recovered and was presumed to have passed through the open door into the corridor beyond. Madame Caillot was questioned extensively over the following days. She maintained that she had acted in defence of her honour. She stated that Monsieur Calmette had threatened to destroy her reputation through publication of her intimate correspondence. She had gone to his office intending only to plead with him to desist. She had brought the pistol for protection. When he refused her entreaties and spoke insultingly of her character, she had lost control of her reason. The examining magistrate requested samples of the letters Calmette had possessed. The Figaro provided copies. The correspondence dated from 1907 and 1908, when both parties had been married to others. The content was passionate, but not scandalous. There were references to political matters of no particular sensitivity. The magistrate concluded that while publication would have caused embarrassment, it did not constitute grounds for murder. Medical experts were consulted regarding Madame Caillot's mental state at the time of the shooting. She was examined by 2 alienists, both of whom concluded she had been in full possession of her faculties. She had purchased the weapon deliberately. She had concealed it until the moment of confrontation. She had fired 6 shots, reloading being unnecessary as the magazine held sufficient rounds. Her actions suggested premeditation rather than sudden passion. If you're finding this case as compelling as we are, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It truly helps us continue researching and sharing these forgotten stories from history. We also read every comment, so let us know your thoughts on this case below. Now, let's continue. Evidence was sealed and forwarded to the office of the public prosecutor. On the 21st of March, formal indictment was issued charging Henriette Caillot with willful murder. She was remanded to the prison de Saint-Lazare to await trial. The trial was scheduled to commence in July. Word spread through Paris that Madame Caillot had been granted extraordinary privileges during her confinement. She occupied a private cell. She was attended by her personal maid. Her meals were brought from outside. She received visitors without restriction. These arrangements caused considerable public comment and were reported at length in the newspapers. The trial opened on Monday the 20th of July, 1914, at the Cour d'Assises of the Seine. The presiding judge was Monsieur Louis Albanel. The courtroom was filled beyond capacity. Journalists occupied every available seat. Among those present were representatives from newspapers across Europe and America. The defendant sat composed, dressed in black, attended by her counsel. Her defence was led by Maître Fernand Laborie, advocate of considerable reputation. He had defended Alfred Dreyfus in the affair of 1899, and had since represented numerous clients in cases of public prominence. His strategy was to present the shooting not as murder, but as a crime passionnel, an act committed under irresistible emotional compulsion. The prosecution presented its case methodically. Witnesses testified to the purchase of the weapon. The gunsmith described how Madame Caillot had selected the pistol and received instruction in its use. Clerks from Le Figaro described the shooting itself. The medical evidence was read into the record. The bullets were presented to the jury. The prosecution argued that the defendant had planned the murder deliberately and executed it without hesitation. The defense called character witnesses. Friends testified to Madame Caillot's gentle disposition. Her husband took the stand and spoke of the anguish caused by the threatened publication of their private letters. He wept openly. The judge called for order. Maître Laborie then presented his central argument, that a woman's honour, once impugned, could drive her to acts beyond the control of reason. French law recognized the crime passionnel as a category distinct from premeditated murder. The jury must consider whether Madame Caillot had acted in a moment of ungovernable passion. The trial lasted 8 days. On the final day, the defendant herself addressed the court. She spoke for nearly an hour. She described her suffering at the hands of Le Figaro. She spoke of her husband's career, destroyed by malicious journalism. She stated that she had gone to plead with Calmette, not to kill him, but that his contemptuous manner had driven her beyond endurance. Several women in the gallery were observed to weep. The jury retired at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They returned at 5:30. The foreman announced the verdict, not guilty by reason of crime passionnel. Madame Caillot collapsed into the arms of her counsel. The courtroom erupted in applause. The acquittal dominated the front pages of every newspaper in France. Le Temps called it a triumph of justice. Le Matin declared it an insult to the memory of the victim. Foreign correspondents wrote that France had sanctioned murder in the name of wounded pride. The verdict reflected, they said, a peculiarly French understanding of passion and honour that was incomprehensible to more temperate nations. The trial had consumed the attention of the public for 8 days. During that same period, the diplomatic crisis that would lead to the Great War was reaching its culmination. On the 28th of July, the day the verdict was delivered, Austria-Hungary declared war upon Serbia. The French newspapers gave the news secondary prominence. The Gouffé Affair remained the dominant story. Within days, the balance shifted. On the 1st of August, Germany declared war on Russia. On the 3rd of August, Germany declared war on France. The matter of Henriette Caillot was displaced from the front pages. She retreated from public view. Her husband's political career, which had been severely damaged by the scandal, suffered further during the war years. In 1918, Joseph Caillot was arrested and charged with treasonous correspondence with the enemy. He was convicted and sentenced to 3 years' imprisonment. The conviction was later overturned, but he never returned to government. He lived quietly in retirement until his death in 1944. Henriette Caillot herself lived until 1943. She resided for most of her remaining years at her husband's estate in Mamers, a small town in the Sarthe department. She gave no interviews and published no memoirs. The shooting of Gaston Calmette remained the single act for which she would be remembered, though she lived nearly 30 years beyond it. The building at number 263, Rue Drouot, was damaged during the German occupation and subsequently demolished. Le Figaro relocated to new premises on the Rond-Point des Champs-Élysées. The newspaper continued publication throughout the war and the decades that followed. In 1975, it moved again to its present location in the 9th arrondissement. The trial transcripts were preserved in the archives of the Cour d'Assises. They run to several hundred pages and contain testimony from 60 witnesses. Few read them now. The case that once consumed France has faded into historical footnote, recalled chiefly for its timing. The acquittal was delivered just days before Europe descended into a conflict that would kill 17 million people. The graves of Gaston Calmette and Henriette Caillot lie in different cemeteries, separated by many kilometers. His is marked with a stone monument bearing the dates of his birth and death. Hers is unmarked, save for a small plaque with her name. Both are visited rarely. The rain falls on them equally.